work I do at the India Dev Center in Hyderabad. I run the Azure Compute group in the India Dev Center. So we're the group of engineers that bring up Azure right from bare metal. There's a tech stack called Autopilot. We haven't open sourced that yet. We run the bare metal tech stack and different layers of the Azure, the core kind of compute fabric and the kind of compute resource provider. And the team in IDC that I work with also delivers Azure Migrate, which is essentially a lift and shift product that allows customers to move into Azure. We also deliver Azure Site Recovery, a DR product for Microsoft. And so that's kind of my technology background at the India Dev Center. I'm a long-time veteran at Microsoft, have been there for more than 2 decades. And I've seen Microsoft go through this huge transformation over the last many years. And for that, I'm going to talk about that transformation in this keynote. So at the core of this transformation is the reimagining of Microsoft. Every large enterprise has a broad mission statement, and ours is as broad as it gets. Our mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And at the core of our mission statement is the soul of the company, something that we hope will be remembered by. And of course, we have a strategy and ambitions that kind of power this mission statement. The most interesting part of that mission statement is probably those words, every on this planet, because hopefully over time, our ambitions kind of scale beyond this planet. But where I wanted to kind of take this conversation is that empowering every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, given that that's at the core of our mission statement, we believe we have a good way to harmonize the needs of the individual, the developer, and organizations. In the past, we've had a very storied past with respect to open source, but the market is embracing this transformation. Out here, you have a bunch of quotes by some very luminary leaders, influencers in the space who are noticing the fact that the new Microsoft has taken bold new steps and has embraced this transformation and is leading the way in many, many kind of directions. I think, I don't know how many of you know this, but in 2014, Satya was up on stage with the Microsoft Loves Linux. Many of you may have seen that poster. And that probably was the beginning of this transformation for Microsoft. And I think in the words of our fearless leader, I want to talk about the fact that Microsoft needs to be judged by the actions we've taken in the recent past and the actions we take today and the actions we take in the future. And we believe that in the context of open source, we have done a fair amount of great work that allows us to really put wood behind the words that we are embracing this particular transformation. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the cultural transformation that Satya has kind of powered at Microsoft. I did tell you that I've spent more than 2 decades at Microsoft. So I've seen Microsoft through its dark periods. I've seen Microsoft go through its periods where I don't think we were embracing open source for sure. I don't think we were succeeding in environments that were new to us. And in many ways, Satya's leadership has been like a sea change, a reimagining of Microsoft that we talked about. And I'm going to talk about that in the context of open source. So this kind of timeline covers our, I think, 5 to 6 year journey kind of in the space. I'm going to call out a few key ones that I think are inflections for us. The first, the .NET Foundation being created, Microsoft statement saying Microsoft loves Linux, VS.Code, our developer platform, the developer editor kind of being released, the Hadoop work that we've done, the Node.js Foundation. 2016, SQL on Linux. For nearly a decade in my career, I spent building SQL Server on Windows. We had spent tons of effort and energy building a database engine that would scale to kind of obviously processing around 1 billion transactions a day. And we'd done all this work on Windows. In 2016, nearly around a decade after I left the group, we released SQL Server on Linux. To me, this is such a strong like statement that talks about how we're willing to take a big bet on obviously the ecosystem and how our largest customers are asking for our applications and our database engines and kind of availability on core Linux platforms. We joined the Linux Foundation in 2016. We delivered the Windows subsystems for Linux in Windows 10. 2017 was another big inflection. Brendan Burns, who's the founder of Kubernetes, joined Microsoft. I have the unique honor of being a peer of Brendan in the current role that I'm at in the Azure Compute org. And Brendan, founder of Kubernetes, is a very interesting personality. He obviously is very well known in the open source space, and he essentially helped Azure Compute transform from its Windows, I'd say, roots and really start embracing open source. I'll give you a very strong example of this. A lot of you must be familiar with Service Fabric. Service Fabric is our app orchestration platform. This is a hyperscale platform that we've built over decades to help us build and ship some of the largest applications on the cloud. In fact, the entire Azure SQL investment is powered by Service Fabric underneath. For the longest time, we were pursuing Service Fabric as something that the community would use. But when we ended up working with Kubernetes, it became clear that there was a lot of kind of customer momentum behind the Kubernetes movement. And I think by us also launching our own Azure Kubernetes service, we kind of put wood behind that. And not only that, we submitted a large number of projects, Draft, Brigade, Kashti. These are examples of some projects that we submitted to the Kubernetes community. We joined the Cloud Native Computing and Cloud Foundry Foundations. And a lot of the work in database and Postgres announcements that we made around Databricks, all this happened just relatively like recently, 2 years ago. And in 2018, VS Code got ranked as the #1 developer tool in open source. And our Service Fabric investments that we talked about, we ended up open sourcing those. GitHub acquisition, that was last year. And I think one of the largest community of developers, Microsoft developers, nearly more than 5,000 of them contributing to GitHub open source projects, in fact, to projects that are not Microsoft, to nearly 8,000 projects that are not Microsoft. So the fact that we have one of the largest community of open source developers within Microsoft. And another kind of big inflection was the fact that the Azure cloud was now deploying more equally like Linux virtual machines compared to Windows. Right? That number hovers around 50, in the 50 kind of range, which makes Linux a very key, I'd say, workload, or I'd say a platform that the Azure cloud has adopted. So 2018 was, again, a very seminal year for us. And just this last year, again, full of many announcements. I want to call out a few. I was running out of slide space to kind of call out all the work that has happened in the last year. And, but I'll call out one specific one, the open application model. This and Dapper, this is the one we announced literally yesterday night. Dapper is a portable event-driven runtime for Kubernetes and really kind of helps you come back with like an application model on top of Kubernetes. We also recently worked with other companies, Google and a bunch of other companies, to kind of create the Confidential Computing Consortium. And I'll talk more about this in a few minutes. And we joined the Hyperledger community to kind of advance the work in kind of blockchain. So I hope this journey of the last 5 years that I've kind of put out there gives you folks a strong sense of the level of commitment we bring to this, to open source and kind of our own kind of transformation into the space. In terms of our GitHub contributions, they've gone up. I think at one point, VS Code was one of the largest GitHub repos out there that we had contributions towards. VS Code ranked #1 developer tool, Stack Overflow, language survey. So it's very clear that the momentum we had built over the last 5 years has peaked and kind of is continuing to kind of grow. the previous slide also talks about the work that we've done in the last year as we kind of move towards this. So the way we have come about this big transformation is by adopting 3 approaches. Innovate, where we release our key innovations as open source for others to build upon. Contribute, where we contribute code and thought leadership, for instance, in the area of kind of confidential computing, by helping form a consortium. We're essentially contributing our thought leadership to open source communities. And the last one, where we believe the cloud, in our case Azure, enables every developer and organization to more easily adopt and open source in the cloud without having to be an expert. And I want to kind of call out at this point that this approach that we have taken is not specific to Microsoft. Every cloud vendor out there has an enabled strategy for open source, right? So I just want to kind of call out that while I may talk about Microsoft's own point of view here, it's important to keep in mind that developers like to stay cloud neutral. When you containerize your application, you're really trying to kind of do it in a way that doesn't take a strong dependency on a given cloud, and that's for good reason. So while I may talk about Microsoft Azure, I want to kind of definitely call out that all the other kind of cloud vendors that are out there are absolutely following the same approach of kind of enabling all their developers to kind of access and adopt open source in the cloud without having to be an expert. And that's a very key aspect. So I'm going to talk about these 3 strategies that we've followed and call out the specific aspects that allow us to kind of make traction. And more importantly, it's very hard for some of you to believe this. And I think as you look at the quote on the right, Microsoft really and truly is well on its way to becoming an open source company, right? And the fact that we are creating new open source languages, TypeScript, right? We actually use TypeScript as a way to develop the Azure portal, right? We use the TypeScript language to kind of specify the Azure portal. PowerShell, which is our automation infrastructure, our automation scripting language, open source language, and R, of course. And key cloud infrastructure pieces, for instance, Service Fabric, ACS Engine. In the last year, we've taken Helm, which is a Kubernetes deployment package manager, and we've released it to open source, and I'll talk about a few more. Again, we're a key contributor to the Linux kernel. It's a leading Linux innovator. In fact, we're ranked as one of the top contributors to the Linux kernel. I'm going to take an example from my own backyard to talk about this last piece. Nearly 5 years ago, we had acquired a company to essentially help us make progress in the DR space for Microsoft. Azure Site Recovery, the product, needed technologies that would allow us to replicate a virtual machine from source, an on-premise source, to a target cloud. As part of this, we acquired a piece of technology that essentially built a disk filter in Linux. And this disk filter is fairly complex because it's able to track every write made to the operating system through a disk filter and replicate these writes with full fidelity to the target cloud region. In the last few years, we have released this support for a wide variety of Linux distros, right? I mean, nearly 20 or so Linux distros have this support so that we can essentially offer disaster recovery as a capability to all Linux workloads running on Azure. The interesting direction that I'm going to take, that we are taking going forward, is now we're going to take this disk filter, which was maybe 3 years ago was considered core IP for us, and we're going to find a way to open source this. So we're still in the process of doing this, but I'm just giving it as an example of a mind shift where we think by contributing this back to the Linux kernel, we will have a much better way to keep up with the file system innovations that are happening in the Linux space. For instance, every time the Linux community delivers a new file system, in fact, one recent one that a few years ago, the BTRFS file system that was a new file system, we had to kind of go do a lot of work to enable the disk filter to work with the BTRFS file system. So we believe that by contributing this code back to the Linux kernel community, we now are able to essentially not just make that community richer, because we have given it a fairly important capability that we previously considered proprietary and intellectual property. But we believe that both the community and in this particular case, Microsoft will benefit from this collaboration. So in many groups across Microsoft are looking at Linux and thinking about, okay, the innovations that were previously kind of guarded as intellectual property or proprietary, and thinking through, does it make sense to continue to do that? Or is it time to now kind of evaluate a new, more open approach to development? The next big pivot for us is contribute. Out there on this slide, you can see a bunch of examples of how Microsoft employees are kind of contributing to nearly 8,000 non-Microsoft projects. That's a community of 5,000 plus developers. How we're contributing to foundations, for instance, the .NET Foundation, the Linux Foundation, the Cloud Native Foundation, the Cloud Foundry Foundation, and a bunch of other kind of foundations where we're leading and kind of giving a bunch of the thought leadership behind that. And how we are also like building a bunch of communities. 3,700 companies have contributed to .NET Core, one of the largest GitHub repos. And I think the quote on the right probably says it all when it says that Microsoft is demonstrating impressive traction when it comes to open source contributions. And in the words of Satya has talked about us being all in on open source. Now we can probably kind of put meat behind that and say that this is more than just words. We've actually demonstrated by a bunch of the work that we've done in terms of kind of contributions to the community that we really believe, truly believe in open source. Just want to call out this announcement. This happened last June, where the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, voted to accept Helm. Helm is a Kubernetes package manager, and we believe that having Helm be a first-class entity, first it was a sub-project of Kubernetes, and now we've taken Helm, and CNCF has accepted Helm as a top-level project. And by doing this, we've essentially now created a huge community around Helm. In fact, there's an entire conference devoted to Helm that has a lot of traction. 64% of application developers, operators, and ecosystem tool developers answered a recent survey that said that they all use Helm as their Kubernetes deployments kind of solution. So I think in building Helm, we really are building tool sets to kind of on-ramp to Kubernetes. And in many ways, the new approach is to not build it in a proprietary way, but to kind of contribute it back to the community and have the community kind of take it forward. And that, I think, is a very interesting kind of direction shift that we've embraced. This next example that I'm going to talk about, Trill. Trill is an event processing engine that can process trillion events in a day, right? This is essentially, if you want an event processing engine that can process massive amounts of scale with like very low latency, you really need a very high-end analytics processing engine. And this is just an example. We did this like late last year, where we took the tech stack that we'd been building since 2012 within the company, and we decided to open source it. And just to give you an example, how many of you out here play Halo games or are familiar with Halo? I see a few hands going up. So interestingly, if you've been a Halo game player, a bunch of the experiences that you experience kind of in terms of the fluidity of the game, Trill is a processing engine behind the scenes that is processing a bunch of the player movements and kind of obviously does it at real time, right? So also interestingly, we were able to take our own, the open source innovation that we had and deliver Azure Stream Analytics to the market in 10 months, which is kind of a very, very fast-paced kind of innovation. Probably these are things that are very real and very, I'd say, common in the open source community. But for us to be able to innovate at that rapid pace on an open source stack, I think is quite amazing. And I want to just call out that we believe that by taking our own innovations and putting them in open source, we now have the benefit of the entire kind of community kind of contributing. And the last piece of the puzzle for Microsoft is the enable strategy, where we believe that the cloud enables every developer to adopt the open source in the cloud without becoming an expert. And some of the examples out there around Kubernetes, MySQL, Postgres, Redis Cache, Spark, just to name a few. And I think the key thing is, by going to the Azure Marketplace and downloading one of these deployments, you really kind of preserve the open API. We've done nothing to obviously mess with that. And I think more importantly, there's a strong integration with Azure Security and Monitoring. So you now have an open source application running in the cloud in a way that's very secure and well managed. And that's the value that I think cloud vendors kind of bring to the table. While I talk about the Azure story, I'm sure there is a story from Amazon and a story from Google, especially, that has similar kind of leanings. And the last one, which we believe, we really think it's important to embrace the enterprise ecosystem. And for embedded ISV partners like Red Hat, we really believe we work very closely with these vendors to kind of make sure that we have Linux distributions that are Azure optimized in some sense, but kind of more importantly, that you can run a secure and well-managed OS image in the cloud. So I think the key thing is all these open source tool sets have first-class citizenship in Azure. And that, I think, is powerful because it then makes sure that just as we have traditionally embraced first-party offerings, we have a very strong statement at Microsoft that says first-party equals third-party, right? Which means that whether it's a partner ecosystem-driven approach or a first-party driven approach, we believe both of them need to get first-class treatment, and that's exactly what we've attempted with our enable strategy. Azure has a fairly strong open source set of offerings. The booth out there kind of talks to these in much greater detail, and I'll probably just skim through these. In the management area, Chef, Ansible, Puppet, the usual kind of players, databases, SQL, Cloudera, MongoDB. On the infrastructure, Red Hat, Canonical, Linux distributions, Docker. And on the app side, I think you can see a bunch of the work around Drupal and Cloud Foundry and app frameworks, Node.js, Python, Java. I just don't want to inventory them, but clearly there's a ton of open source innovations that we believe Azure embraces as we are on this journey. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about specifically the Azure story. Azure, the world's computer, deployed in 54 regions worldwide, and kind of 90 or so, more than 90 or so kind of compliance certifications. And this is the work I was talking about, right? My team is really responsible for kind of making sure that our cloud, when it runs on those 54 regions worldwide, those virtual machines and that infrastructure is running at the highest scale, at the highest degrees of reliability. That's the work that part of my team does in the India Dev Center, along with developers in Redmond as well. But the interesting kind of call out is, especially as Azure has kind of moved the dial with respect to being seen as a trusted cloud, we've also working with the Linux Foundation and other partners to create the confidential computing kind of consortium. So I'm going to take a few minutes to motivate this problem. So let's just say that you have multiple data sets running in the cloud. You're running a data analytics pipeline in the cloud that requires you to now aggregate information over multiple data sets. Now, the part of the worry that customers have bringing stuff to the cloud is, hey, what if the cloud vendor has a breach? What if now the cloud vendor has access to that data that they're not supposed to have access to? And in many ways, the confidential computing work that we're doing, it's work that is research work that we've now taken to production. And in fact, the work that we're doing with the consortium is to kind of do this in the open source, is to essentially build this notion of what we call enclaves that allows us to run this trusted code so that nobody else has visibility. So end-to-end between the customer's data on-premise to the cloud, customer has full control over their data, and none of this is visible, or there's no visibility to that data to either the vendor or the edge device. Intelligent cloud and intelligent edge paradigm that we have had over the last, that's evolving, it's important to kind of make sure that they feel that their data is trusted, that the privacy of the data is in place. And we believe the work that we're doing, along with Alibaba, Baidu, Google, IBM, Red Hat, Tencent, all these organizations are kind of coming together to kind of really form a consortium and really develop a lot of the forward-looking work in the open source. So if you look at the open source innovations in the cloud, on the right you can see a plethora of offerings, right from in each of these areas. I think as we talk about the private cloud, the hybrid cloud, and the public cloud, and we believe this allows us to take the trust in Microsoft, the trusted computing initiatives that we have developed in Microsoft over the years, and stretch that across the entire stack and address your enterprise needs in a trustworthy way. And in many ways, I think we are essentially, so as we look at the Linux cloud infrastructure, it's important that we run existing and new business critical workloads in Linux in the cloud. And we've, of course, kind of worked with a bunch of partners on the right, Red Hat, Ubuntu, CentOS, and pretty much every Linux distro out there is represented to kind of ensure that we have the greatest images, the best images in terms of their security, their versioning, and kind of and their enterprise grade. And we also have a very strong Red Hat partnership. And in fact, my team in IDC owns a bunch of the Red Hat work to kind of make sure that when a customer deploys a Red Hat application in the cloud, that Red Hat image is well prepared and has all the kind of security kind of guards in place. The next, the kind of support we have for dev test for Linux-based workloads, I'm going to just call out a few. The technology partners, Jenkins and Nagios and Puppet, Chef Puppet, Ansible, a bunch of the ones on the right. And Java enterprise platforms, the work we're doing with JBoss, Java, Oracle, WebLogic. So the fact that we believe the cloud has to offer a very strong Java enterprise platform for developers. And for the LAMP and Mean powered kind of web applications, of course, we've done doing some good work and kind of ensuring that the scaling opportunities that we have for our own first-party applications like VM scale sets work equally well for applications that are like using the LAMP or the Mean paradigm. And we have a very strong partnership with Bitnami and support for Node, Java, PHP, Python. And so as you can tell, we have a lot going on in each of these kind of pivots. And with this, I want to kind of really talk about the fact that the cloud is really a new way to think about your data center, right? On the left, there is the dedicated infrastructure. You have an IT team, purpose-built hardware, an ops team, and on the right, you have industry-standard hardware. You have a CI/CD approach, a DevOps approach, and a much more loosely coupled app and microservices architecture. In many ways, we believe this transformation from the left to the right is powered by open source. We truly and genuinely believe that the cloud model is not just richer, it kind of is almost imperative that the cloud model supports open source to kind of allow this transformation from this very traditional monolithic on-premises kind of architecture to that of the cloud. And we believe that a lot of the people in the room today kind of are leading this transformation. So with that, I just want to talk about the fact that the traditional model really, while it focuses on ultimate control, the one on the right focuses on cost and agility. And we're now able to take all the investments that we've made, virtual machines, scale sets, containers, and service fabric, and essentially offer it to the larger community. So what you see is virtual machines. This is what we call the pets model, where you have, and then the scale sets where you have a lot more kind of scale out. And in the, by kind of making Azure open at every layer, we've essentially adopted the fact that this transition from the left to the right is enabled by the cloud. So with that, I think I'm getting indications that I'm done with my time. I'm going to leave you folks with this quote by Satya. Judge us by the actions we've taken in the recent past, our actions today and in the future, because this is clearly a moment in time where the open source movement has reached its peak. A bunch of you in the audience are leading this transformation, and we believe that Microsoft's own point of view on this is very strong. We believe that we are equal participants in this community, and we believe a lot of the directions going forward, we will embrace this transformation and, more importantly, kind of contribute to it in very meaningful ways. And as a lot of you out here are aware, the transformation of paradigm shift of computing from client-server computing to that of the cloud and the edge is going to be powered by really AI and ML. And I'm assuming that all of you out here are thinking about how artificial intelligence and ML is going to really be immersive to every one of your user experiences. And so I'm going to urge you folks to think about your own place in how you can effect this transition, and more importantly, how to kind of think about open source in the context of Microsoft. And with that, thank you. And I don't know if I have time for questions. I have 5 minutes. So we do believe that we have a very strong hybrid cloud approach, right? I think that's been the strength that we've carried to the market. We have a very large on-premise estate, and we believe that we will take that estate with us. I mean, whether they move to the cloud or remain on-premise, at the end of the day, the customer is king. The customer decides where they want to run their workloads. So we do believe that with a bunch of the, specifically with OpenStack, we have a bunch of innovations that are underway that allow us to kind of ensure that we will have a single pane of management in the cloud, possibly to be able to run policy or do RBAC, role-based access control, things of that nature. So short answer, our hybrid management story absolutely spans the public cloud and the hybrid cloud. And so short answer, yes, we do believe we will take them along with us. So, life cycle, right? SDL. But in many ways, the question is no different for proprietary software versus open, right? I think just the fact that you use an open API, in many ways, the security posture of the customer cannot be compromised. So we go through threat modeling, kind of go back and think about all the threats, right? Denial of service, elevation of privilege. We essentially go through a security life cycle and threat modeling and understand, so in many ways, an open API is no different from how you treat a proprietary API. So to short answer, we go through the same diligence we would with a proprietary API. So thank you, folks. Thank you for your time. It's absolutely an honor for me to be here representing Microsoft in this amazing community. And thank you for allowing us to be here and more importantly, kind of participating in this amazing movement that we're all part of. So thank you.